Before I get on with the business at hand, I'd like to say a few words. It's fabulous that the games industry in Romania can coagulate, can come together to form an event like this. It's the first edition of Dev.Play, hopefully one of the many. And I'm really thrilled that Cătălin and the RGDA staff was able to put together the show. It's not a small thing. On purpose, they attempted to make this an event that is independent, organized fully, with their own means, supported by the amazing companies that are active in the game space in Romania, right? So a big hand for Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Gameloft, Amber, Carbon, everyone who contributed. Thank you very much for making this happen. Thank you for having me as well. So without further ado, I would like to start talking a bit about the Elite Playbook, right? Elite is in hacker parlance, describes a formidable accomplishment. So I think the task at hand is to figure out how we can become the best in the world through collective action. And by we mean the Romanian game development industry. And I know the word collective has terrible connotations in Romania, owing to a very inglorious socialist past. But I'll show you how this is our only chance to be fully formed and fully realized as an industry. So I think it's incredibly important that we create, maybe nurture that collective action. Why should we care about this? Why should we care about the industry? I think capitalism teaches us that individual merit and individual accomplishment is the only thing that matters. So any type of collective action would be at least strange. And here's why we should care. Because we only have finite resources, and effectively exploiting the natural wealth of our country means a corruption of the natural environment. It means that we are polluting our rivers and lakes. It means that we are cutting down our forests. It means that we are mining our mountains and destroying the natural environment. If we simply exploit the natural resources of the country, that has, first of all, finite goal, finite means of full realizations, and also it means that we are not fully realizing the potential of our people, right? So finite natural resources, but theoretically, the good news is that theoretically we have infinite human potential to harvest, right? And how do we do this? My central thinking here is that we need to apply a development model where we build a sustainable economy. We do that by leveraging local talent, by producing world-class value, and last but not least, we do that in a manner that enhances the country brand. So by this point, you're probably thinking, all right, this sounds very, glorious, and is there actually a way to accomplish this in real terms? And there is. Some stats. There will be a few boring slides in this presentation, but you'll have to bear with me. Thank you for that. Software is eating Romania, right? We, as a proportion of the economy, about 7% of our GDP currently is created by software-related activities. It's growing super fast at 10% a year. There have been other sectors of the economy that have grown faster at particular points in our history, but on a sustained basis, software is growing the fastest. And if the economy would stay at the current levels, 65% of the economy would be software in 25 years. It's a staggering amount. Of course, other sectors of the economy will continue to grow, so this is just kind of a theoretical exercise, but we are looking at $30 billion, 30 billion euros per year generated by software development, a staggering amount. And here's another idea that I'd like to share with you, the idea of cultural transmission. So, I mentioned the fact that we need to create and propagate a country brand. And why is this important to have a country brand? Because the country brand itself doesn't just represent us as Romanians as inhabitants of this cultural space, but it also attracts investment. It builds a reputation. It allows us to be competitive in many different fields. So there is actually economic value to having a powerful brand as a country. And the best means to have a country brand is to have culture that other nations around the world look at and get inspired by. And the best way to do that is through entertainment. To have various products that contain entertainment value that are distributed around the world. And if we think about entertainment, we think about categories like newspapers, magazines, music, broadcast television or cable television, radio, film, box office, and video games. And if you see at the bottom, video games are actually a significant portion of a very mature entertainment market, and that is the United States, $25 billion in 2015, bigger than newspapers, bigger than magazines, bigger than music, bigger than radio, and bigger, yes, than film box office. Not only is it a very important entertainment category, but it's growing rapidly. From 1985 to 2015, 79 to 200 billion overall size of the market, but games are 5% in 1985 and 2015 are 13%. And the growth continues at a very rapid pace. If you look at all the entertainment categories, you'll find that games are growing the fastest. Actually books are kind of losing steam currently, so the magazines and newspaper, and film is growing slowly, music also growing just a tiny bit faster than music. And then TV still has fairly decent growth on the subscription side, but games dwarf almost anything else. All right, so the global games market. It's a juggernaut, right? Ian also mentioned the fact that we have roughly $100 billion estimated to be generated by the industry in 2017. It's a remarkable number, fifth of Romania's GDP, if you will. Romania as a country is ranked 47th in terms of game industry revenues, 126 million, a paltry figure. And the reason for that primarily is piracy. There is no actual vibrant domestic market to speak of. So most of these revenues that you see here are actually investment and labor costs and really the cost of operating companies that that produce games that are based in Romania. And here's the other interesting thing about games, right? We've established that games are important, right, from an economic perspective. They're growing fast. They are an industry to be reckoned with on a worldwide basis. From a cultural standpoint, games are also aggregators of art forms. And they do that, I'll explain this in a moment, but I'll argue that they do that better than almost any other medium. They also cross those art forms with high tech. So it's a unique marriage of artistry and technology, which make games profound and unique. You'll have, in order to make games fully realized, right, in a AAA console space, you would have traditional art represented. Daniel Dociu is one of my favorite artists, and he works at NCSoft as a concept art lead, art director. In cinema, you have Radu Jude. Radu could be a great director for cinematics or for trailers, for games. Actually, he's done a lot of advertising work in the past, right? So for him to apply his skill to games would be quite easy. In music, I gave the example of Silent Strike. My friend Tudor was saying that Cristi Minculescu would have been a better choice. Obviously, I love Iris too, but I thought, Silent Strike would be more modern. And in performance, if we had motion capture in the games, Alina Cojocaru could be, and her interpretative dance would be such a fabulous choice. And if we wanted to have really incredible and profound writing, then Mircea Cărtărescu could contribute to that, right? And you can take this format and apply it to any other major form of games production in the AAA space, and you'll find that you can aggregate these art forms and you can create a final product that is fully expressive in all these domains. So, the point that I'm trying to make is that games will be the leading form of cultural transmission in the 21st century. I mentioned earlier that cultural transmission creates a country brand. So by inference, if games are going to be the leading form of cultural transmission because they're growing the fastest, because they are such wonderful aggregators of art forms, because they're so resonant in the modern world culture, in modern world perceptions, because they're so pervasive as a form of entertainment, that games can be very powerful as a country brand formation. And, okay, I should introduce myself. I haven't done this already. My name is Mihai, and I have a political science degree at UCLA. That's probably why this talk is so laden with public policy and philosophy and economics. I started my career at Activision, had a stint at Electronic Arts, founded Jam.Mobile Romania, which then became EA Romania. More about this in a moment. I worked at Disney, and now I work at Samsung. I represent their emerging platforms division. And in my scope, we have a developer program, and we operate Galaxy apps, Samsung's App Store. So, if you're interested in promotion and distribution of our mobile games, by all means, please talk to me after this talk. I'd love to connect you with the right people. So, I wanted to take a moment to recap the history of the game space. If you remember, my thesis was that we can be the best in the world through collective action. So us as a games industry, as game developers in Romania. And I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the path that we have taken to get here. Because this conference is actually a historical moment for the development of the games industry. It's a very special time in our history. So let's take a look at the past and see how we've come to this point. I think all stories about software development in Romania start with Grigore Moisil. Not only was he a brilliant professor in the 50s, but he had this unique talent of catalyzing others to care about informatics, as it was called at the time. So he created a generation of computer scientists. And some of the first expressions of computer science in Romania were the mainframes. The first one was created in 1957 by Victor Toma at the Atomics Physics Institute, Institutul de Fizică Atomică, pe platforma de la Măgurele. And Victor Toma was one of Grigore Moisil's disciples, right? And so that's how the lineage propagates. That in 1962, Timișoara came through with Mechip-1, another mainframe, at the Polytechnic University. Josef Kaufmann and Willy Lowenfeld were the ones that designed it. And in 1963, yet another Romanian city comes to the fore with Dacic at the Computing Institute of Cluj. And Tiberiu Popoviciu was the lead designer there. And in the 60s, we also have the first microcomputers being created. And probably microcomputer is a very leading term when we're talking about effectively a shelf, right, that includes all those circuit boards. The key event in the development of the software space in Romania was the foundation of the Computers Technology Institute, Institutul de Tehnică de Calcul, which was founded in Bucharest in 1967. And in the 1970s, the Felix C256 was released, was based on French Iris 50 computer. And that was further inspired by the IBM System 360. So, I guess it's all connected in the end, right? We are connected at the source of all the leading innovations in the software space, even back then. And in 1974, the first Romanian-made, fully Romanian-made microcomputer was released, Independent 100. And why Independent 100 was important is because in 1976, Felix Schach, a chess game, was developed by Viorel Darie at ITC in Bucharest. And 1976, if you think about it, 1972 was Pong, right? You saw that in Ian's presentation. Only 4 years later, we have our own Romanian-made, fully developed software running on a Romanian-made computer. And even more extraordinary, in 1984, the first multiplayer chess game was organized. One I-100 terminal at Casa Scântei, controlled by the very renowned Octavian Paller, who at the time was an editor of Romania Liberă, and connected via modem to a Felix C256 at ITC. And they were going back and forth, and it was quite an event. In this photo, you'll see Viorel Darie up there. He's quite young, and this Octavian Paller. And the rumor has it that Octavian Paller was very close to losing that game, but came through at the very end. All right, so the 1980s, that's the time where, a lot of you, started interacting with computers, I hope. I was certainly privileged to have a computer in my house, and mine was a Sinclair Spectrum ZX128. And it didn't look like that. Mine was just a circuit board that was smuggled into the country. I used an Electronica 302 cassette player to load my games. I think a lot of you did. It was kind of the standard if you want to load games. That was the Russian-made gigantic beast. It never broke. Mine, I think, still works. Some of my friends had they were lucky to have a Commodore 64. That was fabulous. I mean, I would go over to their house and play games, and I thought it was light years ahead of my Sinclair Spectrum. And the unlucky ones had an HC85, HC. It worked. I mean, you could play games, but it was painful. So it is what it is. And I have a present for you. Kind of sounds like experimental electronica, doesn't it? Imagine half an hour of this. All right. So, again, half an hour of that more. That was just like, the screen coming through, but then you'd have to wait for quite a while. So yeah, that was my experience playing games. A lot of that crap. When I finally got to diskettes, 5-inch, 3.5-inch, I thought that was such a liberation. But anyway, getting back to the task at hand with history, right? The 1990s comes along, and we have the pioneers of the industry. The seminal event in the formation of the industry in Romania is the founding of Ubisoft. Ubisoft, as a company philosophy, had this incredible ambition to be present all over the world. They would be extremely aggressive about opening studios. A fact that remains true up to today, right? Ubisoft is everywhere. They have experimented with studios in many different locations around the world. Sometimes they fail spectacularly, but sometimes they are successful, and I'm really happy they were successful in Romania. The first person to lead Ubisoft Romania was Laurențiu Rusu, who met the Guillemot brothers on a train ride. I have no idea what they were doing in Romania, but they met with Laurențiu, and they recruited him. He knew nothing about video games, but they liked him. He was a smart guy, he was an ambitious guy, and that's how the story begins. He led Ubisoft between 1991 and 2001. He got a lot of support from Andrei Lopată, someone I will tell you more about in a moment. Ubisoft currently is a behemoth, over 1,200 staff. It's led by Sébastien Delange from 98 to now, and quite successful. In 94, AMC was founded. It was actually a computer assembly company, very small company. They started doing games development in 98. AMC today is led by Cristina Neamțu. It specializes in art production since 2000. That's been their kind of steady business since then. And they have over 100 staff. In 95, it's another interesting date in the history of video games. Active Pub was founded. They released the first commercial game made in Romania called Rival Realms. It was published by Digital Interactive in UK and by Titus Software in the rest of the world. And it looked like that. So not very exciting, but I think it owes a lot to kind of the Warcraft series. Amazing game. I haven't played it, to my discredit. I couldn't find it, actually. But if you have it, please let me have it, too. In 96, we finally have specialty media in Romania with the release of the Game Over magazine. It only ran for 16 issues, but the quality of the writing made it the publication to have. And it really kind of set the standard for the games press in Romania afterwards. 97, the Level magazine was launched. It was active until 2013, and then today it's Nivelul 2. It's another games publication. In 98, Fun Labs was created. Adrian Filippini led and continues to lead the company. We have about 30 staff there. And in 99, something else interesting happens. Nemira, which is a book publishing company, formed a games division led by Andrei Fântână, and they attempted to develop an RTS game called Zamolxis. They haven't been able to release that. I think they ran out of money. I think that was the issue. They tried yet another game. That wasn't released either. So it wasn't a successful experiment, but it was a daring one, for sure. In 2000, we have an industry emerging. You know, outside of Ubisoft as a major multinational in the 90s, we had very few large companies, actually almost none. But in 99, next to Ubisoft, Gameloft was created. It was initially led by Andrei Lopată between 99 and 2002. And then it was taken on by Paul Friciu, who leads it up to this moment. And it has over 1,100 staff with offices in Bucharest and Cluj. A lot of you have graduated from Ubisoft and Gameloft. I think we owe an immense debt of gratitude to those companies for educating those present here. In 2002, Exosyphon. Robert Mureșan, they created a game called Hacker Revolution. It was #4 bestseller on Steam in 2010. They're primarily a PC gaming studio. And in 2005, Mobility was created by Costi Marcu. They most famously developed Frozen Freefall. As you saw in Scott's presentation, that was a very successful game for Disney. Their most successful game ever developed by Disney, actually. Top 50 grossing for quite a long time, almost 2 years. Made more than $100 million in revenue. I don't know the exact number, but it's actually significantly more than $100 million, which is, I think, to date, the best commercial performance by any Romanian-made game. I could be wrong, but I think that's true. And in 2005, I show up. Jam.Mobile Romania was founded as a branch of Jam.Mobile based in Los Angeles, where Scott was working. It was acquired in 2006 to become EA Romania. I was their first GM and only GM, but it has had a succession of leaders. The company is organized vertically, so various leaders report directly into other structures internationally. But Alex Marinescu is a seminal figure at EA Romania, head of operations there. Dan Teodorescu led their studio in the past. Vlad Beu is leading their studio now and has more than 1,500 staff. And in 2007, Vivendi Games Mobile is established, becoming Namco Bandai in 2008. about 150 staff at the time, led by Andrei Lopata. And so I skipped a couple of images. This is Cristi Marcu, who is also right here. And this is me and my friends. I didn't mention Alexander Norgaran. He used to run our deployment group. And that's the fancy new Electronic Arts building that Alex has set up. And we get to 2010, right? So this is the dawn of the indies, when we have the first truly successful indie companies formed in Romania, and some of the older ones achieving some measure of commercial success. But first, Atypical Games, led by the famous Andrei Lopata, who I mentioned a few times in my presentation. 34 staff, relatively small group, but highly effective. They released Sky Gamblers in 2012, followed by Battle Supremacy, and a few other titles more recently. 2012, Maven Hut, a games company that was formed by people that did not come from games. They don't have a Ubisoft Gameloft lineage in any way, or EA lineage. But they applied some of their kind of web expertise to creating web and mobile games, led by Bobby Voicu and Cristi Bada. They were able to complete a franchise sale, so they sold their Solitaire game, multiplayer version of Solitaire, to RockU in 2015. And in 2013, Amber is created. This is the largest independent company, independent meaning with Romanian capital, headquartered in Romania. Over 200 staff currently, led by Dragoș Șâncu. And in 2015, another important moment for the game space, we have finally the first games incubator and accelerator in Romania, led by Cătălin Budnariu, who is also the president of RGDA. And I wanted to share with you also some stats. This is taken from the Romanian Ministry of Finance. It kind of gives you the kind of high-level perspective of where game development companies in Romania were at in 2015. Some of these numbers don't correspond with the headcount figures that I shared with you previously, because it's, again, reflecting 2015, and I try to give you the latest and greatest figures now. So very interesting. Some data mining was required in order to compile that information. So you'll see the revenue that is registered by the large multinationals, Ubisoft, Electronic Arts, Gameloft, King. I didn't mention King. King was also a rival in the dawn of the indies, definitely not an indie, a branch office led by Mihai Strijan, still around. And then Amber, Mobility, Maven Hut, and others. So that's the ranking. Obviously, it changes every year. Should be hopefully a dynamic ranking, but you can expect the multinationals to be at the top. All right, so a few takeaways from my side, right? That's what I think about the industry. This is a really boring slide. I apologize for it. There's no way to sexify it. I also don't have more videos, so be warned. Could get really boring. I'll try not to make it so boring. But the facts are that the local industry is dominated by large multinationals. But we do have an indie scene emerging, so that's good news. However, it's a very tenuous position in the indie scene. We had a Cambrian extinction of the indies at the end of the 90s. The first wave of enthusiasts basically disappeared then and re-emerged in various forms later, maybe joining a multinational or starting new companies. VC investment, venture capital, is entirely absent in the game space in Romania, which is a great opportunity too. That's why I think events like this can evangelize the cause. We clearly have a lot of talent. We have fabulous programmers and artists and designers. And with a measure of capital formation, this industry could be very, very successful, I believe. There is angel investment. There are some people out there that are willing to fund new enterprises. Publishing and distribution, almost entirely absent with one singular exception, and that is Carbon. Education system is woefully inadequate to producing the talent that we need. That's why I mentioned Ubisoft and Gameloft as academies of game development That's absolutely true, because if the education system is not there, you only can train people in the job, right? EA is doing also a fabulous job of that, and of course King and others, but we need the educational system to come through to make this work. The tagline is that local economic conditions do not allow competition against the global elites, right? It is also apparent that labor costs are increasing. We could, in the past, compete on cost alone, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. And support for game developers from the private or public sector is inexistent. So we do have a massive opportunity, as I mentioned, deep reservoir of local talent. But we are in an unfair fight. So, and this will be the object of the next phase in my presentation. You'll find that the established games industry in US, UK, Japan, so on and so forth, benefit from the presence of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. What is lacking in Romania is exactly that. Not only you have 30+ years of uninterrupted market-supported industry evolution in those places, but you also have a network of universities. We have R&D labs, incubators, accelerators, and a vibrant development community that gets together for events like this. That's why we've started this event, right? So we can share our experiences and coalesce into a lobbying force, hopefully. These other markets have vibrant private equity. They have angels, mentors, peer networks, specialized banking, legal, accounting, administrative service providers, corporate supporters, all invested in the success of the game space. And as I mentioned, the fullest expression of that is how successful can entrepreneurs be in that milieu, not how large the multinational companies can get. And the key ingredient that all of these markets have that is absolutely essential is that there is some form of state subsidies for the games industry. And I don't mean for the software space, I don't mean IT and communications in general, I mean the game space. So let's look at the future for a second. The whole object of this presentation is to provide a playbook. Okay, what could we do in order to place the Romanian games industry on a path to success? First, bear with me, this is a heavy slide. I need to explain this in a bit more detail. This is the result of quite a bit of research, and it basically tries to simplify but cover the major incentives that states usually offer to support their industries, an explanation of what these incentives mean, the economic benefit of the incentive, and also the economic fit to Romania. We have to be very clear, Romania is very different than a Western market. So things that may work well there may not apply well here, and I'll explain why. But the first incentive to review is the tax credit for development. What this means is that you receive a tax credit for the cost of labor. You know, that chunk of cost would basically be given back to a developer or a studio at a certain percentage, right? And that can vary from 10% to obviously 100%. Normally, the way this works is that you can redeem the tax credit on the open market at roughly 85 to 90% of its value. So companies that require tax credits, because game companies usually don't require those tax credits, their tax burden is not high enough for them to care about that. But you can trade your tax credit to another company, let's say an oil extracting company that incurs significant tax and effectively will pay you cash money for the tax credit that you have collected out of the game's R&D activity. This is a cash equivalent incentive, meaning that you can trade every year, you can trade your tax credit from the government, the one that you received, on the open market and get cash flow. It supports company consolidation, it lowers operating expenses, and it provides an increased measure of global competitiveness. The economic fit to Romania for this incentive is fantastic. Why? Because the state does not pick winners. The state is basically saying you as an industry receive, let's say, 50% of your R&D costs will be given to you as a tax credit, right? So if you incur, let's say, $3 million in labor cost and you get the 50% tax credit, 1.5 million of tax credit you can then redeem on the open market, as I mentioned to you, at 85 to 90% of the value. And that is an established practice in many different markets. You will see it's quite popular around the world. The R&D super deduction, that's another one. Basically, that helps you reduce tax burden by subtracting qualified R&D expenses from the tax owed. It's kind of like the same one, with a simple difference is that those tax credits are not, you cannot trade them on the open market. You can just use it to reduce your tax burden. And it encourages profit maximization, right? If you already have a successful company and you owe a bunch of money to the government, well, if you are in the game space and the game space was subsidized in some way by the government, your tax would be reduced proportionally by the amount of the subsidy. This economic fit is okay. It's not a great fit because it only really delivers value for companies that have already achieved some measure of commercial success. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, you don't care about this. Your tax burden is effectively nil or very low. You're just trying to grow. So the third one is actually what a lot of places around the world use to encourage entrepreneurial activity. And that is a cash grant. The government will come to you and give you 100,000 euros, right? And cash funding is effectively what startups need, right? That's the key thing. But the economic fit to Romania is terrible because it means the government will have to make the decisions on who gets the cash. And that means, invariably in Romania, it means corruption. It means favoritism. So let's not do that. The last one, a partial wage tax exemption. That's basically labor tax reduction. If you're a programmer in the game space, you would receive some type of tax incentive. All the software developers in Romania receive that, right? So you have 16% tax reduction that has been in place for quite some years. So I think that's good for an individual, from a salary perspective, that increases your salary. It would reduce some operating expenses on the employer side. So effectively, you can see it as a salary increase that we offer developers. I mentioned it's already deployed. Very rare measure internationally. I don't, in the study that I surveyed here, which is a Deloitte study, a global survey of R&D tax incentives, very few countries had deployed it. And frankly, outside of Romania, Russia, Hungary, Belgium, and Netherlands have it, and nobody else. All right, so looking at the landscape of state incentives around the world, the tax credit for game development, the one that I was telling you, I think it's a great fit for Romania, varies by country to country. Like Singapore is nuts. You will get in Singapore 100% of the cost that you deploy as a startup in starting a game company back from the government. Effectively, it's free. Being an entrepreneur in games in Singapore is free of cost. They're so desperate to create this industry and to attract capital that they will start by giving all your money back. You effectively don't have to go to a VC. The state will support that. Again, this is a tax credit. They don't give you cash. They just give you that tax credit, and then you go on the open market and convert it into cash flow. So in effect, if they give you 100%, you'll probably get back 85 to 90% of the cost, which means that only 10 to 15% are money that you have to put down towards starting your company. It's a fabulous incentive. Korea, I think I'm missing some countries from this list. I don't know, the formatting is a little bit crazy, but Korea is another great example. They have 50% tax incentive. Canada, we will talk about Canada in a bit more detail in a moment. Because Montreal is a great case study there. But Canada has up to 50%. Actually, Nova Scotia as a province has the best incentives. I think Toronto is around 40%. Quebec is 37.5%. Again, you take your labor cost, subtract 37.5%, and then you convert it on the open market for cash. If you're wondering, by the way, since we got to this point, if you're wondering why is it why do the governments use this system about conversion on the open market as opposed to just paying you money? Well, the idea is that governments don't reduce their budgets when they take this measure. You know, if you're an oil producing company and you don't have a system for harvesting tax credits on the open market, you may be tempted to effectively repatriate your profits elsewhere, you know, or find some other scheme to reduce your tax burden. What the government basically gives you is a solid market legal way to reduce your tax burden. In the process of doing that, they also support an industry that they care about, that they believe is important. And we believe games are important. We believe games are the leading form of cultural transmission in the 21st century. We believe they build a great country brand. We believe they don't consume natural resources, so we should invest in games. Or more broadly, we should invest in media, right? Because media is a great form of cultural transmission. Entertainment is essential to building the country brand. USA has incentives. You know, those vary by state to state. It's quite a patchwork, but they average around 30%. Ireland, Japan, and then Romania, 0%. You'll notice that that is a running theme. Here's the R&D support deduction. Again, some countries are completely aggressive on this. Like Lithuania will give you almost 3 times as much tax reduction based on the labor R&D costs. Romania does 0. Now, if you know, I had a long discussion with my friend Alex Marinescu about this last night, and he mentioned that there are indeed there is indeed an R&D support deduction framework in Romania. It applies to research in software. It does not apply to game development or producing activities, commercially minded activities. It's mostly about encouraging academic research in the software space. So from the games industry perspective, it is effectively 0%. R&D cash grants, again, very aggressive in some countries like Mexico. I don't think it's working very well for Mexico. They don't have a great games industry to speak of. But you can get a lot of incentives from the government. So you do that in Poland. I think Germany does it well. Germany actually uses the system in a transparent, non-corruptible manner. There's a little bit of that in UK. UK could be supported more by their government. I think some action to push in that direction has taken place in the past years, but it's still an uneven fight for UK. UK has the benefit of very vibrant games industry, but is losing some steam to other locations that are more heavily supported by governments like Montreal. And Romania, again, 0. I mean, sure, there are some European Union funded programs. You can get 10,000 euros to open a company or 20,000 euros to open a company. Unclear whether you can do that with a games company, but we all know that 20,000 euros in Romania means nothing if you're trying to start a successful technology company, and especially if you're trying to start a game studio that is worth its mettle. It will not actually deliver sufficient capital. So that's the review of the international arena. You'll notice that in each slide you'll have this like red mark. That red mark would be a suggestion or where a local incentive should be set up to be competitive on a worldwide basis. Right? So like if we had 50% of the labor cost for a certain period of time at least offered to a startup in Romania, then that would be significant. Or 200% for the R&D support deduction. But again, that is mostly, only the multinationals would probably benefit from that in Romania. And here's the critical one, right? If in Bucharest, if in Romania, you would get 40% of your labor cost back as tax credit, it would make the country immensely more attractive to foreign investment, number one. It would also make the country far more attractive as an entrepreneurial hotbed for the game space, and it will encourage capital formation. So, case studies are important, right? Because you saw some dry numbers, you know, in the previous slides, and they don't mean anything in isolation. They're just numbers. But let's look at what the practical effect of these policies have achieved. And I'll choose 2 case studies. One is Montreal, and the other one is Singapore. Montreal, as I mentioned earlier, 37.5% labor cost credit for video game development. This has been in place since 2002. And the key thing to take from the Quebec case study is that it resulted in 10x increase in the number of people employed in the games industry. So the general effect of this state policy that did not require them pulling money out of their budget. It was just a smart way to get the market economy to subsidize itself by focusing investment from one area of the economy to another, right? From the extractive industries, which are pretty strong in Quebec, to the media space, or more specifically to the video game space, is that it created this vibrant games industry. It created a university system catering to those needs. 230 companies in 2016. It's now the 5th largest video game center in the world. Before 2002, it was nothing. Montreal was just not on the map. We probably had more games industry than Montreal at the time. So during this time, it exploded, right? Ubisoft, of course, massive studio there, produced Assassin's Creed. EA, Square Enix, which is branded Eidos in Montreal. Warner, Activision, through Beanox, and many, many others. And here's another interesting thing about subsidizing the games industry. Because it's this marriage of art and technology, it gives rise to additional industries. In Quebec's case, it also fostered a very vibrant multimedia industry. Technical and post-production services, visual effects for the movie industry, right? So you have these really talented artists, they're technologically savvy, they can put those skills in creating content for movies, for advertising, for media at large. So that's Montreal. I'm so impressed with this. And I have to tell you, this was not achieved by some luminary in the government concocting this scheme. There's actually a trade body focused on multimedia space that has a games vertical now, like fully formed, that has lobbied the government to create this outcome. So this is what means to engage in collective action. It means that us as an industry, we can force our government, lobby our government to engender this outcome to benefit all of us, to benefit the industry at large. Here's another really poignant example, Singapore. The incentives there you saw are absolutely peerless. Like they give you money to start a company, so extremely aggressive. Again, a case study where the games industry was completely absent 10 years ago. Or actually, in case of Singapore, there was almost no technology to speak of. We have a history that goes back to the 50s in software development. Singapore definitely not have that. So 100% labor cost credit, 200% R&D support deduction. Annual growth rate for the games, animation, online media is 26%. 1.5 billion created in the industry, and these incentives have been in place for about 5 years. I remember being at EA, and Singapore was negotiating with us to expand the Electronic Arts studio locally, and they showed us, this 100% labor cost credit. It was incredible, just beautiful, I would say. Singapore also does a number of other things that are super smart. They've made partnerships with accredited, very reputable universities in the United States to open campuses locally so they can train people and they can form a specialized labor market for games. So they have partnership with DigiPan, with MIT Gambit School. They also subsidize a conference, whereas Dev.Play is an emanation of the games industry in Romania with no state support whatsoever. All the sponsorships come from the game space, with one notable exception, and that's Samsung, which we're very grateful for participating here and sponsoring. Everyone, basically, there's no state subsidy. And in Singapore, GameStart is supported by the local authorities. And it's a massive consumer-facing event, right? 17,000 attendees. And also they have an incubator, right? It's a government-sponsored incubator called the Game Solution Center. Now, Singapore is so heavily invested in creating a games industry that I would say that model, even though it's inspiring, it probably wouldn't work in Romania. Again, because when you give the government so much authority to make all the right decisions. In Romania, it probably would make a series of wrong decisions. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't welcome state support. As far as public policy formation is concerned, without state support, honestly, our industry doesn't have a chance. We are number 47 in the world in terms of revenue generation, a number which is absolutely ridiculously small, thinking that we have 7,000 plus people in the games industry in Romania, right, that are producing successfully and that are working at very reputable companies. So, collective action. I think this is the last slide. Thank you for bearing me up to this moment. Collective action means we need to lobby, right? We need to lobby for establishing a tax credit for game development. The way we achieve this is by leveraging our positions within the multinationals. We have to tell management that we would like them to encourage the government to step in the right direction. The way we do that is through RGDA, right? So I think if you're not a member of RGDA, please join. I think it's a wonderful thing that we at least have one organization that is 100% autonomous, that is willing to support the industry. By organizing events like this, by ensuring that any inquiry for capital investment concerning the game space can be funneled to the industry, like maintaining a database of game developers, organizing pitches, organizing game jams, organizing a presence for the games industry in general. But for RGDA, we can ensure that because as voting members of RGDA, we can ensure that government action is a priority, that we speak to the government about the needs of the games industry, and then we should expect results. We should hold Cătălin to task, like, okay, how have you progressed in the last 3 months, Cătălin, in this domain? He will tell you, I met with the so-and-so minister of development. I've put together this newsletter. I've organized this roundtable with representatives of the private sector and the government. All of these things actually matter. They do have an effect. Quebec shows us that private concerted action can move the needle and can create this amazing result. And we can do that as well. We can support political parties that are willing to insert a tax credit for games development into their platform. Obviously having some parliament representation for this viewpoint is exceedingly important. So let's try to find the parties that are willing to do that and work with us. And last but not least, to get the word out. Social media, blogs, our journalist friends. I mean, I know it sounds like ridiculous, and the state feels so powerful and imposing, the great Leviathan. Like, how can we have a hope to influence the state to make these decisions? But the state is us. We can do this. We can influence political events. We've proven that time and time again in recent history in Romania. We can, obviously, sometimes it takes forms like, taking to the streets, to protest certain things that we don't agree with. In this case, the action has to be probably more mediated through the formation of a lobby and through our support of that lobby, because the end effect is so incredibly positive for all of us. So it's not going to be easy. This is a multi-year process, but I'm hoping that we can all contribute towards it. So that's it. I know that Romanians don't like to ask many questions, but if you do have some questions, by all means, please let me know. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Test. Okay, there we go. Have you thought about bringing over folks from these other countries that have successfully lobbied for these actions to provide a blueprint?
Absolutely. So hopefully in next edition of Dev.Play, we can hear from some of the people that have engendered that result. We're not talking about one person alone. Obviously, we're talking about a trade body. The equivalent of that in Romania would be like the GMs of all the major studios get together and they lobby together the government. You know, they bring the ministers of the economy or development to that forum, and they have a discussion with them, and they explain their viewpoint. So it's not just one person, but we can bring representatives of that trade body to talk about the history of how they went about it. Now, we're talking about the Canadian government, which I think, or more specifically to the Quebecois local government. So completely different environment. You know, the relationship between business and state is much closer than in Romania. But I think it would be inspiring. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
So regarding Mexico, one of the reasons actually that is because IDE from Singapore. So IDE has a strategy actually on going in different countries that somehow have a synergy with them and do exchange. So something actually you should look into that to tap into the IDE or Temasek, which is the sovereignty fund, and IDE, which is the government body. And they're going to different countries around the world actually establish that because it's a way that they can have some sort of influence actually on different policies. And that's why you see Mexico with that huge actually. That's an influence from Singaporean government into Mexico for the IDE, and they're super open to that. So I just want to
that's very interesting, because you know, one of the things that we could do is if we have some people in the Ministry of Development or Ministry of Finance. I don't even know who the right body in Romania would be to contact to have this discussion. But if you start having conversation with them, maybe it's a matter of them also meeting their you know, their similar representatives in the Singaporean government and learn from how they've encouraged capital formation in certain sectors of the economy. Because Singapore is amazing, not just in the game space. Their entire media program is top-notch. And I think they do it with a capitalistic bent, meaning they're trying to make money. You know, in the end, all of these free incentives get paid back by the fact that you create these companies that pay taxes, you know. So, and they also create a lot of jobs in the market, right? So I think they have this long-term perspective, invest in order to get the returns, but it's all predicated on the idea that, you know, you are going to reap benefits, we as a society and we as a government, a representative of the society. So, great idea. Yep. Good stuff. Any other questions? All right, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.